Hello, this is Bill Sisler in my vineyard in Paso Robles. We're looking at a Cabernet Sauvignon vine that's mature. It's a little over 10 years old, and I have pruned them every year to a state that I like, that makes it easier to do pruning every year. And my goal is to, every time I prune, is to choose a cane from last year that's the closest to the cordon. That way I remove any long-legged spurs from last year, and it keeps it pretty clean. This vine is fairly vigorous, and so the best thing to do to start is to pre-prune. Pre-pruning can be done anytime early in the spring, and it can be done by someone with not too much skill. You just have to instruct them. But if you're particular about how you prune, then I prefer to do the final pruning. So first we'll do the pre-pruning, which is we'll cut off the canes about 8 to 10 inches above the spur and clean the area out so we can get a closer look at what we have to do. One thing that you might consider, because these get attached to the wires, and sometimes when you pull them off they whip, you should always wear safety glasses in the vineyard to protect your eyes. I'm going to take this adjacent one off here. So you can see right away that it opens up the area, and you can better assess where you need to make your final cuts. These vines are trained as bilateral cordons, and what that means is that from the trunk I take two vines out in each direction, and those are called cordons. Then I do spur pruning, which on that cordon, I choose a spur evenly spaced along the cordon and prune it down to 2 buds. It makes for a nice clean vine. And then I have 2 pairs of wires. There's 2 here and 2 up here. And I train the vines, which is called VSP, vertical shoot positioning, which means that the vines are trained vertically through the wires. The only difference is that I'm standing on the north side and the south side needs a little more shade, so I let some of the vines drape over and shade the fruit. It also makes it easier to pick the fruit, because standing on this side, the fruit are all in the fruiting zone, and I don't have to deal with the canes in my face. And my helpers like that too. Okay, so we've cleaned off what you call rough pruning or pre-pruning, and now I go along the cordon and I remove last year's spurs that I don't want to keep, and that opens up the cordon even further. So here's last year's spur, and I just take it off right there. Here's another one here that I remove. Sometimes there's vines, canes on the bottom. Here's one here that's long and lanky, and I take that off. So as you see, as I go along, this was last year's spur that I trimmed last year, and now I'm taking it off. You'll also see right here, last year's spur, I pruned to 2 buds, and I got a cane and a cane. And then from the basal, from the base of the spur, I got another strong cane here and another strong cane here. What I choose to do is keep those basil buds, canes, for this year's spurs. And as you notice, they are growing really close to the cordon. So I'll continue this all the way across both cordons. I do a vine at a time. And this vine is, as they get mature, the cuts get harder because the canes are bigger, and it's very important to have sharp tools, both with your hand pruners and the loppers, which we'll use in a few minutes. It's good for the vine to have clean cuts, and it makes it easier on the hands. Okay, I've gone through and taken off most of the last year's spurs that I don't want to keep. And now you notice, if you look at what I have left, they're pretty evenly spaced along the length of the cordon on both sides. They're not exactly, but the idea is that if you make them evenly spaced, the plant is more balanced in its growth, and you'll have more consistent ripening of fruit. The canopy will be more consistent, and it just makes it easier. So now we start at this end, and we're going to choose one of these last year's canes as our new spur. So here's a nice vertical one that's right near the end, and so I prune it at 2 buds. One bud is right here at the base, and one is about halfway up. Now I'll get 2 strong canes from those buds, plus I may get some new canes that come up from the basal or the base of the spur. So usually once you get going, you can just move down the vine. So here's the next one. The next one. The next one. And the next one. So look, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spurs on this cordon. And on this side now I do the same thing. 1, 2. This one I think I'm going to take off, but I'm going to leave part of it for right now and go down and choose the ones I'm sure I want to keep. Okay, so let's count them now. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That means I want to take these 2 off because that's about equal with the other side. Okay, now we want to look closely at the cordon to see how we can encourage growth of new buds closer to the cordon. And in this little section, I will first take off the canes that I don't want to keep, or last year's spurs. Here's one. Here's another one here. Now let's look at what we have left. First of all, we want to choose the cane that we're going to use for this year's spur. Here's one very large on the end. We're going to keep that. And then the next one is a little bit smaller than a pencil. So I'm going to actually just keep 1 bud there. And what that will do is that bud will develop into a cane, but it'll also encourage the growth of basil buds to develop new canes for next year's spur. And here's one here that's a little better, so I can keep 2 buds on that one. Okay, now I want to show you a couple of things about the shoots. You notice when you see the shoots begin to flower, or the buds begin to break, they always break near the end of the shoot. That's because most of the energy is always driven to the end of the shoot, the cordon, the vine. So if we leave too much of the shoot, all of the energy will be pushed up toward the end. Now when we're trying to encourage growth of strong new shoots on a vine that may be not as vigorous, we need to go back close to the cordon and just save one bud. Now in this case, my prop says that you should never keep a shoot or vine that's smaller than a number 2 pencil. And the reason being that it's so constricted that it cannot drive energy on that thin vine. So keep that in mind every time you look at a shoot or a vine. Cut it back to where you at least have a number 2 pencil size. So on this one, we'll cut it back to 1 bud near the cordon, and we should get a nice strong shoot for next year. And now you notice that if you look closely, you will see where the last year's spurs were, I'll have knobs or leftovers of the spur. And I'd like to cut those off and cut them down as close to the cordon as possible. That way you encourage new growth right from the cordon instead of the end of an old spur. So for this I have to use the loppers because they're much bigger and much more difficult to cut. So we trim it down to new wood. And you see I cut it right down to new wood. Usually you won't get any buds on old or dead wood, so it's important to trim them down close to the cordon. Sometimes I'll have to go to the other side to do it properly. There's a real big one here. I think I'll have to go to the other side to finish that. So we've completed the pruning on this vine and also removed the dead wood and the extra knobs that we want to take down closer to the cordon. The one thing that I suggest is that after you prune, you should spray the vine, the cordon, the trunk on both sides with a fungicide. That does a couple of things. It protects the cuts from disease getting in. It attacks any mildew spores that may be on the trunk or on the cordons, and it's a safer approach to doing that. Now I'm going to spray right now to show you the coverage, and then we'll finish up. Okay, so I'll show you how we spray the coverage to make sure we get everything, especially the cuts on both the canes and the knobs that you cut off. You want to cover it till it's dripping basically and go all the way down the trunk to the ground. So now that we've sprayed and protected the vine, we have completed the pruning of this vine, and this vine in particular is one that I have pruned year by year to get it where I want it. In this series, you've also seen us pruning vines where we had to make some modifications to move them to the place that you want to have them year by year. It's important to do two things. One, to encourage growth of new buds closer to the cordon, and to keep the vine balanced by having a good even spacing between the spurs. And if you do that every year, you'll see an improvement every year, and you'll get the vine to the place where you want it. So I hope you enjoyed this series. Goodbye.